The sun was just starting to break over the horizon when I walked down the dock with my coffee in hand. The morning everything changed. My property had been in my family for decades. A gorgeous 2-acre stretch of waterfront with a $2.5 million boathouse and an arched wooden bridge that connected my main lawn to a small private island I'd built for family gatherings. That bridge wasn't just wood and nails. It was where my father taught me to fish, when my wife and I had danced barefoot on our wedding night, and where my kids had spent summers jumping into the cool water. But in the eyes of the HOA, it was an eyesore that violated their ever-changing aesthetic guidelines. For 2 years, they'd sent letters demanding I remove it, and for 2 years, I'd sent them proof that my property was outside their jurisdiction. I wasn't even officially part of the HOA. My deed was older than the HOA itself, but that didn't stop them from trying to bully me into submission. Their president, a woman the neighborhood called Karen for her aggressive rule-enforcing ways, had made it her personal mission to bring my property in line. I caught her photographing my house without permission, walking on my dock to measure things, even peering through my windows while pretending to inspect shoreline safety. It was harassment, plain and simple, but I tried to ignore it. That morning, however, ignoring her became impossible. I heard the rumble of heavy machinery before I saw it. When I turned the corner from the dock, my stomach dropped. 3 large construction vehicles sat on my lawn. Men in hard hats were already tearing into the boathouse, ripping off siding, smashing glass, and hauling away planks like it was just another day at work. Another crew was already working on my bridge, using chains to rip it apart piece by piece. "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" I shouted, dropping my coffee as I ran toward them. One of the workers barely looked at me and just nodded toward the street, where Karen stood with a clipboard, sunglasses, and a smug smile. "We're executing an HOA demolition order," the foreman said. I was shaking, partly from rage, partly from disbelief. "This is private property. You have no authority here," I yelled. Karen just smirked and waved a stack of papers at me. "It's for the good of the neighborhood," she said in her condescending tone. "Your structures were unapproved and dangerous. We voted unanimously to remove them." I could barely process her arrogance. I told her she was trespassing, that I'd be calling the police, but she laughed and said, "Good luck with that." By the time the police arrived, half my boathouse was gone and the bridge was in splinters. The officers claimed it was a civil matter and refused to intervene, even after I showed them proof of my property lines and exemption from HOA rules. Watching them drive away while the demolition continued was one of the most helpless moments of my life. But I made a silent promise to myself right there. This wasn't going to end with me as the victim. No one destroys my family's legacy and walks away unscathed. Now let me ask you, if someone destroyed something you'd built with your own hands and memories, would you take the high road or plan to make them regret it? By the end of that day, my once pristine waterfront looked like a war zone. The boathouse was reduced to rubble, the bridge nothing but jagged posts sticking out of the water. Karen strutted away like she'd just won a major victory, calling over her shoulder, "Next time, maybe you'll follow the rules." I didn't reply. I didn't yell. I didn't even look angry. Because in that moment, I realized something. Karen had just given me all the motivation I needed to destroy her world in return. And unlike her, I knew how to hit where it hurt without leaving a single legal opening for her to fight back. For the first few days after the demolition, I forced myself to stay calm. Anger makes people reckless, and recklessness leaves loopholes. If I was going to make Karen and her precious HOA regret crossing me, I had to be strategic. So I started by pulling out my property records, not just mine, but the entire HOA's. County archives are a beautiful thing if you know where to look. Turns out, the HOA clubhouse and parking lot sat partially on land that technically wasn't theirs. A narrow strip, barely noticeable, ran right under the clubhouse's foundation, and that strip belonged to me. My grandfather had purchased it decades ago in a deal that predated the neighborhood's formation. The HOA had been using it for years without paying a dime in rent. That meant they were trespassing. And unlike the police who shrugged off my boathouse destruction, the law takes property encroachment seriously when the paperwork is airtight. I didn't stop there. I checked building permits for the clubhouse and found multiple violations, expansions and renovations they'd done without proper county approval. I quietly collected copies, highlighting every discrepancy. By the end of the week, I had a legal arsenal that could bring their operations to a standstill. But I didn't want to just stop them. I wanted to crush them. I filed a formal encroachment complaint with the county, attaching my property deed, survey maps, and photos of the land overlap. That set the legal wheels in motion. At the same time, I hired a demolition crew, the same one that had been hired to destroy my boathouse. I didn't blame the workers. They just followed orders. But this time, I was their client, and I made sure every permit, every piece of paper was in perfect order. When the county ruled in my favor a few weeks later, giving me full right to reclaim the land, I didn't waste a single day. I showed up at the clubhouse early on a Friday morning with my crew, a stack of signed permits, and a sheriff's deputy to ensure there were no misunderstandings. Karen was already there, sipping her coffee on the clubhouse porch, looking like she was ready to gloat about something. The moment she saw the demolition equipment rolling in, her face went pale. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded, storming down the steps. "Reclaiming my property," I said calmly, handing her a copy of the court's order. She scanned the papers, her lips tightening with every line she read. "This is ridiculous," she hissed. "You can't just—" The sound of a wall being torn off the clubhouse cut her sentence short. Within minutes, the building's front windows were shattered, the siding stripped away. Neighbors gathered, whispering and filming as the clubhouse, their HOA's symbol of power, began to crumble. The deputy kept Karen at bay as she screamed about calling her lawyer and suing everyone. I didn't even bother responding. Instead, I stood back and watched the place come down piece by piece, the same way I'd been forced to watch my boathouse vanish. Only this time, the destruction was entirely justified. And here's something I want to know. If someone had wronged you this badly, would you stop after getting even? Or would you push until they lost everything? By the end of the day, the clubhouse was nothing but a flattened pile of debris. The parking lot was taped off, and without their headquarters, the HOA's operations were in chaos. It was a classic swatting attempt, a fake 911 report meant to trigger an armed police response. Dangerous, illegal, and now it was personal. I didn't confront her right away. Instead, I got to work. First, I called the county dispatch center and requested the 911 transcripts for that morning. Because I was the subject of the calls, I was entitled to them. When the files arrived, I nearly laughed. The caller had disguised her voice, but the phrasing, the pauses, and even a faint background sound of her yappy little Pomeranian barking gave her away. I took the recordings to a friend who worked as a private investigator. Within a week, he had proof that the calls originated from Karen's cell phone. With evidence in hand, I scheduled a meeting with the HOA board. They were still reeling from the loss of their clubhouse, and the last thing they needed was another scandal. When I played the 911 recordings at the meeting, the room went silent. One board member covered his face with his hands. Another muttered, "Oh my God." Karen tried to interrupt, claiming the audio was fake, but the investigator stepped forward and confirmed it was 100% authentic, backed by carrier records. The board voted on the spot to remove her as president and ban her from holding any HOA position in the future. But I wasn't finished. I filed a criminal complaint for false reporting and reckless endangerment. The local news picked up the story. HOA president accused of fake 911 call. And suddenly, Karen was a pariah. Neighbors avoided her. Friends stopped returning her calls. She even put her house up for sale within a month. And here's my question to you. If you had the power to ruin someone like this after they tried to destroy your life, would you go all the way or walk away once justice was served? In the end, Karen pled guilty to misdemeanor charges and was fined heavily, along with being ordered to pay me restitution for the chaos she caused. I used the money to start rebuilding my boathouse, piece by piece, exactly as it had been before. The bridge will take more time, but I'm in no rush. Every nail I hammer in feels like closure. The HOA, without Karen's iron fist, became far less hostile. Meetings were now about bake sales and landscaping tips instead of personal vendettas. Some members even apologized for what had happened, though their words could never fully erase the damage. As for Karen, the last I heard, She'd moved to another state, probably to start fresh. I just hope for her sake she learned that you can't bulldoze someone's life without consequences. And every time I stand on my dock, watching the sun rise over the water, I remember the promise I made that day. No one destroys my family's legacy and walks away unscathed.